Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Dan Jenkins and Kathy Guthrie discussing the role of leadership educators, transforming learning with the International Leadership Association. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I am an educational developer with the Teaching Commons at York University and co-editor of the Pause for Pedagogy series. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Dan and Kathy to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So welcome to both of you. We'd love for you to start by telling us a little bit about who you are. And why don't we start with Kathy?
Oh, all right. Yes, Kathy Guthrie. I am an associate professor at Florida State University, where I am the director of the Leadership Learning Research Center, and I coordinate the undergraduate certificate in leadership studies. And I've been there now for 10 years, which
Wow.
yes, isn't that crazy? It has been a great 10 years that I've been a Knoll and have loved every minute of working with primarily undergraduates, but also master's and doctoral students in higher education and in leadership education.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. And Dan, what about you?
Well, hello there. So I'm Dan Jenkins. I'm a chair and associate professor of leadership and organizational studies at University of Southern Maine. I've been here about 5.5 years, and before that I was working at University of South Florida, directing their leadership minor and finishing up my graduate work. Was a chair of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group for ILA, and I'm very active in this organization, and excited to be on the video with you all today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thank you both. So today's Pause for Pedagogy is a little bit different. Typically, we talk about individual programs, initiatives, or events related to leadership and leadership pedagogy in higher education. But today, we're going to talk about an entire book of resources, insights, and ideas related to leadership pedagogy that Dan and Kathy have been working really hard on, and that is coming out soon. I should have a better date than soon. When is it coming out?
Yes,
any day now.
Any day now. Yes, we are working or waiting for the final indexing to get through for the publisher, and it'll be out. So we're excited.
Awesome. So by the time this goes up, it may already be out, which is pretty cool. So Dan and Kathy have agreed to come on Pause for Pedagogy this time around and talk to us a little bit about the book and what you might expect from reading the book, which I know many, if not all of you, should be doing soon. So my first question for both of you, what key question or questions were you hoping to answer in writing this book? Where did the idea or the need for this work come from?
I think the need for this has been a longstanding conversation among leadership educators within ILA and in other associations. And honestly, Dan and I talked several times about, there's really no resources available. There's not a resource that we can go to help us. Yes, we have, within the association, there are multiple, but especially when it comes to instructional strategies, there was not something where you could pick up and have a lot at your fingertips. This really also came about because I was asked to develop a required course for our master's students in the higher education program at Florida State about being a leadership educator. And when I started on that journey, there was not a lot of readings. I mean, I was digging far and wide trying to find readings to really teach this and to teach about how do you be a leadership educator. And so that really was the first kind of fire that was lit. I mean, we've always been talking about it and talking about how we need some like a central resource, but that was really something that said, okay, we need to really talk about instructional strategies that leadership educators can use both inside the classroom but also outside the classroom, because there's a long history, not only for academic programs in leadership, but also co-curricular in those contexts within a university of developing leaders and leadership education.
Yeah, I'll just add. I mean, thinking about what Kathy was saying, having really made leadership pedagogy kind of the central focus of my scholarship from my doctoral studies to the present. It was always what strategies might I use to teach this or that, or knowing what I know or what my peers know about the college teaching literature and strategies and assessment and some of the learning theories and student development theories. It was just this, hodgepodge of resources all over the place that we really had to make our own meaning of. And so, I recall pretty well when Kathy reached out to me to say, hey, I've got this, this idea, this opportunity, what do you think? And, everything lit up because I thought, this is the chance to contribute in a way that can create this resource for leadership educators, because we often go into the classroom and, play around with a lot of different types of teaching strategies and assessment strategies. And, the need was to, whether it was, a handbook, a guidebook, a resource of somewhere that somebody could go and say, okay, I'm going to facilitate a debate today or a discussion, or I'm going to run a simulation in class. Are there some best practices for this? Is there a better way that I can go about doing this? What does the literature on college teaching say about ways to facilitate this? But also to to span, as Kathy mentioned, those co-curricular areas, because the content transcends the different contexts that we do leadership education and practice leadership education. But the way that we facilitate the learning, can also transcend that. So we wanted to provide just this wealth of resources. If you're going to create a course, a program, if you're going to explore different layers of identity with students, if you're going to really focus on reflection, if knowledge base or theories and models and concepts are more the focus of your class, what's a good strategy for that? Are case studies appropriate? What are some benefits of that? What are different types of case studies that have been used? Having students write a case study is much different than having them analyze them in pairs. And so really provide a comprehensive list of these things. And we found through some of the research we had already done and then putting this book together that, we've got at least a chapter worth of references in the end. It almost felt like we were revisiting our dissertation phases. Thinking about that, there just wasn't a one, comprehensive place where a lot of this research and literature lived, and we hope that it's something that that lives a long time for aspiring and practicing leadership educators as a resource. Would love to walk in someday in our lifetime and see it on somebody's desk.
That's awesome, and such a perfect fit for the whole purpose, really, of Pause for Pedagogy that we've been considering for a long time. And several of our articles and videos have talked about the theoretical constructs or the what and the why of leadership education. And what's been really fun and really inspiring, and it sounds like your book is really extending this concept to think about the how. I know from my own work at York and the Teaching Commons, I work as an educational developer. So a lot of my work is directly with faculty who are well-versed in the content, very well-versed in theory, but they always ask the how question. They always want to know what the best practice is, as you said, Dan. Where is the resource to help me do this or do this better? So you're absolutely right, both of you. This is going to fill a really important gap in a lot of the work that we're doing. It's exciting. So speaking of ideas and insights, which leads myself so nicely into my next question, what are some of these key ideas or insights that you're hoping to share with leadership practitioners who will read this book?
Sure. So, we talked quite a bit about the how, and then I'm going to throw a alley-oop over to Kathy, talk a little bit about the who and some of the why in just a minute, because I know that she really helped to outline and really architect and bring that part to life of the book. The how was very important because really it's this story that we tell a lot when we're at conferences and working in professional settings, and we often will meet new leadership educators or folks that have just come out of grad school and say, hey, I'm so excited about this new position I got at XYZ University, and I've been asked to start a leadership program. Do you have any resources for me? And it's and you go, oh my goodness, where do I start? And so this is just one of those resources that we help, along with some of the others. There's the handbook for student leadership programs that's been out there, and I believe on their second edition already, and some other, again, this hodgepodge of resources. But we're hoping to really fill that gap of the how. If I'm thinking about focusing on a particular program or workshop, let's say it's conflict or working in teams or something like that, that facilitators, practitioners can have a resource that says, here are my learning outcomes. How do I then meet these? How are some ways to assess those learning outcomes from a a program standpoint, a workshop standpoint, institutional standpoint. There's just so many resources out there that Kathy and I have had to work with in our own work that we've been exposed to and utilized, that we really tried to take this, holistic, how do we kind of crunch this down and put it in together in a way that's navigable by other practitioners in the field, and hopefully through a scope that's that's accessible. And that was really important with the way that we chose the voice and the examples that we shared. And that's probably one of the other major features that was really kind of an important, I guess, values proposition, was not only do we want to talk about some of the best practices, but include as many examples as possible of ways that we see these things in practice, and also to make sure that we span not only the curricular and the co-curricular, but also the technology enhanced context that we work in. We were very intentional about including online activities and best practices for facilitating online discussion or reflection or media enhanced activities, because we're not just teaching in the classrooms anymore. That was something that was very central to the way that we talked about and outlined the way that we hoped practitioners will use the book from a course design and curriculum design standpoint. So I'm going to pass it over to Kathy, because I want her to chat a little bit about some of the the why and the who, if you will, of some of the needs and things that provided some of the impetus for the book.
Well, I think, Dan, you did a great job at talking about part of the who with the academic programs and the curriculum design and the course design. I think that is so critical. I also think about those student affairs administrators that are doing it in a co-curricular context. And that was, we had talked about it broadly. And I think that was some of the best of us working together to really be able to come, and look at it from those different perspectives. And when I think about what kind of brings it all together is that intentionality, right? And so whether you're doing course design or curriculum design, or you're doing a workshop or program, that's still a design, but that it's intentional, that you are creating the learning outcomes, that you're matching your instructional strategies with the outcomes, and then you're actually evaluating. So you have that kind of the full kind of process in there beyond logistics. I remember when I was a first student affairs practitioner, I got out of my master's program and I got on a campus and they said, okay, do a leadership program. Well, I'd never been trained in how to provide a leadership program. Of course, I could do program, but I didn't think about it in leadership as education. It was, okay, how did I learn leadership? And so I literally based my first couple programs off of how I learned. And now I look back and I'm astonished, because not everyone is a white woman that, really comes to a space like I do, And so thinking about how I was creating programs that was really for people like me, which cuts out most of the population. And so how could we expand that? And this book really focuses on, so what are those strategies? What are those specific kind of pieces to really make it intentional in a co-curricular setting, and also just the multiple contexts in which we are in, not just co-curricular and curricular, but are we working with undergrads? Are we working with graduates? Are we working professional? Because how future attorneys look at something is going to be very different than future social workers or med students, future medical MDs. And so there's, thinking about the multiple contexts in which we situate ourselves in. That who piece was really trying to broaden. And Dan had mentioned, we really worked hard in making examples so they weren't all one context, but really focused on broadening that. And with the academic programs, even within academic programs, ILA has the great program directory. And in preparation for this book, we actually pulled all of that information. And just in the United States, there are 1,262 programs that have registered with ILA, and those are vastly different. And so how are we really expanding, this idea of intentional leadership education design, and really looking at program design in those multiple layers? And so I think that, that's not one idea, that's multiple ideas into one that we really try to break down and be accessible for folks.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, Kathy, and you and I are alike in one way, and I'd flatter myself to say many ways, but at least in one way, that we are both white women who come into leadership with a very particular scope and perspective. And I had to learn the same thing. I remember that very clearly, coming into a program and deciding, well, I'm just going to give everybody the MBTI and we're going to talk about it. And we'll probably talk a little bit about what the word leadership means, and it'll be a program.
Yeah.
And it's really been only in the past few years, especially even now in the role I'm in, that we're really considering, just as you said, really intentional, meaningful program design that incorporates these multiple perspectives. So exactly what all of these mission statements and vision statements for programs and universities and colleges talk about coming to life in your book. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So one thing that you both talked about in your article that accompanies this video, one idea that was central was this notion, and you both mentioned this or alluded to it, this notion of leadership learning, and that leadership can be taught. So thinking about this perspective or philosophy, what advice would you give to leadership educators who are looking to explore this idea in their classes or in their workshops?
Well, and I think it goes back, Lisa, to what I had mentioned, is how whenever I started, I was just thinking about how I learned leadership. And so that's then how I was an educator in that specific situation. And so for me, it's flipping kind of that notion, not just necessarily leadership education, but more it should be about leadership learning. So how are we being learner centric? So how are we focused on learning first and the multiple needs that learners bring to a space, whether that's personal context, learning styles. I mean, we could, list a lot of different things, but how is that the main focus versus what we're going to teach them and educate them on? So how are people learning? And I think it is interesting with leadership because it is interdisciplinary. It reaches far and wide. So really thinking about, well, a certain instructional strategy might not work for a pharmacist who's going into a community practice versus an attorney who's a defense attorney. Like it's different. And so we did talk about this in the article, but we really worked hard on thinking, and I mean, Dan said this, we dug up a ton of literature. I think our reference page, you look at it and it's like, whoo, it's a little overwhelming. We were laughing at it ourselves, but we really looked at learning and interdisciplinary, but what are those learning theories? And so really the leadership learning framework is focused on 6 areas. And so I'm going to, tell you a little bit about it. I don't want to ruin the book, but hopefully it'll get you interested in digging in deeper. But, the 6 areas is really leadership knowledge. So anytime we can gain knowledge that we maybe say a new theory or anything, you're getting that knowledge. And so leadership knowledge is one of those areas of leadership learning. Another is leadership development. I'm just going to blow through these really quickly. Another is leadership training. Another is leadership observation, to where you're passive, you're observing, but you're not engaging, because then another area is leadership engagement. How are you exchanging in that engagement piece? And then metacognition, which is really how are we making meaning from all that's around us, all that we're taking in, whether it's the knowledge that you're getting from a book or an observation of a group of people and how they're engaging in the process of leadership, or is it competency that you're building a skill? So all these different areas, you need that metacognition to really take it in and really think about it. And so I would just say the advice is to think about how are people learning, and really be learner centric versus this is what I want to teach. That should be the secondary part. It should be how are people learning? What are, going back to that intentionality, that intention, what do I want people to learn? How are people learning? And then figuring out, well, what instructional strategies are the best? And so I think the book is really good because it helps set that up. In the first part is, the leadership learning and resources, and how are we being, that as a leadership educator, how are we entering that space? And then the second part is all the instructional strategies to really focus on that.
That's awesome. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that Kathy's right on, and we had a blast really coming up with and really the ideation phase of developing the leadership learning framework, because there's so many places that leadership learning kind of happens, and it's this combination of experiences that come together, kind of fused by the leadership knowledge, which we do have a shared language. It's our discipline. It's those those key concepts, models, theories that are at this point tried and true. If we say the discipline started in the late 70s after James McGregor Burns and Greenleaf wrote their books, and we kind of took it from there, and the rest is history. And that we've got academic journals, and we have professional associations, and we talk about a lot of those in the book to kind of situate, hey, these are the resources and the places where we go to get our information, and we wanted to make sure that leadership educators have that, but also for the students in their classrooms, speaking to the different ways, the different places and spaces where students are going to learn. And very, very much so, we situated it in experiential learning, because it is the experiences that students have. And this was another value proposition, was not only as leaders, but also as followers. As we see this kind of followership, tradition really, really situate itself in discipline. It's not only those, experiences that you have in charge, it's those experiences you have in supportive roles, and the contexts vary considerably too. And so, again, Kathy had mentioned the metacognition, and that's right, because it's the meaning making that occurs as a result of the experiences we have in these leadership and followership roles. And so we take the chapter on assessment and bridge it into the chapter, the section or the closing chapters, which are, I think, about 7 or 8, towards the second half of the book, on the instructional strategies, with this idea of leader and follower experiences as this source of transformational learning. And so as students have these experiences, how do they make meaning out of them? How do we guide them and facilitate that reflection? Give them opportunities to really unpack those experiences, whether it be through writing assignments and reflection, or case studies, or simulations, or games, or role plays, or think, pair, share. I mean, there's so many different ways, depending on what your learning outcomes are and the intentionality behind that. That once they make those connections between the content and the experiences they had, they can go back out into the world and try some new skills out, try some new behaviors out, hopefully learn from both the things that they have done well and the times where they may have had a hiccup or a mistake or a challenge, and then the process starts all over again. And so it's really our responsibility as leadership educators to guide students through that process and through those steps, and to create opportunities for them to become better leaders and build those capacities.
It's amazing. And again, I mean, when you say experiential learning and when you say assessment, I get really excited, but I appreciate the bridge and the intersections between those, because that's been, I don't think it's just a Canadian conversation, but in the circles I've been traveling in recently, it's been quite a conversation here in Canada around assessing this notion of meaning making and the assessment of leadership development, or the assessment of something that feels more metacognitive or isn't as cut and dry perhaps as other skills or knowledge acquisition that we think about in higher education. So I'm excited that you're bridging between assessment, experiential learning, and leadership development in a way that really drives down, like what you said, our responsibility as educators to support this meaning making process. So it's not just, do you have it right? But why is it important to you? So it sounds like, as much as the front half of the book was already exciting to me, I think the back half of the book is going to be of particular interest to a lot of our colleagues interested in leadership development. So there's a lot in this book, and there's a lot in the article, and I know both of you do a lot of work. So potentially the answer to this question is, we've already done it entirely in this book, but I also know both of you, and that you're quite productive and prolific researchers and authors. So there's got to be something more. There's got to be something upcoming for both of you, whether separately or together. So where do you see future research or even writing headed in this area? And what will you be writing about next?
Sure. So, I mean, one of our main propositions when we started this project, and Kathy had said, hey, if you agree to do this, you're in it for the long haul. It's not, it's we're going to start with this book, and there's more to come. Yep. And so, we thinking about the amount of examples and things that we included in the book, particularly all the way through with. We talked about different types of leadership programs, because leadership educators are situated in so many different types of of programs, whether it be curricular, co-curricular, management, education, public administration, political science, the provost's premier leadership program. I mean, they're all over the place, and they vary, considerably. We had, examples of different types of assessments and courses and curriculum, and again, the instructional strategies and activities. But we also wanted to make sure that we had enough room in the book for other things. And so we found towards the end that we were really, a lot of our chapters were about twice the length that they were, that they are now at the proof stage, at the publication stage. And so we had thought early on about a companion guide of some type that would be an additional resource for leadership educators to, it's like, so you want to use, role play in your classroom. Here are some exemplar, you know, strategies for doing this, so your topic this week is situational leadership. Here are 5 different various instructional strategies that are grounded in the leadership education literature, the college teaching literature, that you can do, and here's how you facilitate them. Here is the important debriefing stage, which we also talk about in the book, and that's such an important piece of the meaning making stage. Is it's great. I always think about a colleague of ours, Scott Allen, who he does a great impression of a ropes course facilitator that says, wow, Jerry really stepped up when he helped Jimmy get over the wall. Let's go over to the bridge, and it's like, wait, no, like more learning happened here than just, how did we come together? What concepts, how did the team function? What, was there empowerment or delegation in this exercise or activity? And so bringing us to this companion guide that we hope will give us an opportunity to be more example and facilitator guide, I guess, focused or heavy, as well as be able to provide examples. We spent some time with, and there's a chapter on the leadership educator and kind of some of the identity development pieces from a professional standpoint. Corey C. Miller and Carrie Priest have done some great work exploring leadership educator identity, and so it was important to us to build off that and include a chapter on that. But coming soon to a journal near you, we've got a project in store in a couple, probably be published in 18 months or 2 years, about looking at this idea of exploring the notion of becoming and being a leadership educator, and what are some of the similar experiences that we have, and also what are those that are outliers and distinct that have shaped those that practice leadership in different contexts, as well as what does it mean to be a leadership educator? Are we doing social justice education? Are we doing leadership education? Is it management education? And all of the things in between. And so there's a New Directions for Student Leadership that is very, very, very much in its early stages right now, that we'll be working on to continue a piece of this work. Kathy, what else? What am I?
I was going to say, there's more. Is there anything else?
Well, this book is also part of a brand new book series that's called Contemporary Perspectives in Leadership Learning. And so I think that it's an opportunity to even dig deeper into specific, areas of leadership learning, of leadership education. I do know that there's a book in the works on that whole reflection piece. So metacognition, how are people making meaning? And so there, Dr. Jillian Volpe White has done a lot of work in this area, especially reflection in leadership learning. And so she's working on a book that will kind of dig into that. There is also an edited book that will be coming out probably in the next year about, it's titled Changing the Narrative, Socially Just Leadership Education. So really looking at the intersection of social justice and leadership education, and how we should be kind of trying to do as much work in that intersection as possible to move leadership learning forward and social justice issues forward. So I think I would just say those two extra. I was glad Dan mentioned the new directions for student leadership, because I think that is definitely needed, is the conversation to, kind of expand the work that him and Carrie Priest are doing in that, to expand kind of what we had started. There's so much work that we're looking for always more colleagues and people to have these conversations with us, and to dig in deeper in these different areas, because you look at even just the 6 areas of leadership learning framework, that is like a life agenda, research agenda for someone. I know Dan and I can't do that. And so needing help in the conversation around it and the thought process. So I think there's a lot more work that can and will be done. And actually, Lisa, we had talked kind of, off air about communities of practice. And I think that is another piece of it that is definitely for our profession, how are communities of practice being used or could be used a lot better. So I think there's a lot of research coming and is needed in this area.
So Kathy just subtly mentioned one of my research areas, which sounds like I may end up in a life agenda of my own, which is exciting.
Yes.
Not that I would,
that?
I know, not that I would begrudge any opportunity to work with either or both of you. So we'll talk after this interview. Well, thank you both. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or share, or any final thoughts for our colleagues?
I just know it was a blast working on this. I'll just say this is the last, because you can get into projects where it seems heavy, or it seems, gosh, I don't, like, your passion's gone from it. And I think, if anything, working with Dan on this ignited more passion in this process for me, about leadership, education, leadership learning, and about the role of leadership educators. And so I would say, I know we had a blast doing it. We, are looking forward to doing more work, but I think that hopefully people will see that in the writing, and it really be able to engage in the book differently than hopefully some other things that I know I've read. So just be mine.
I was gonna say, Dan, that's quite the compliment. Can you rise to that occasion, or exceed that for Kathy?
I only hope that I could. So no, I mean, it really was one of those, great writing partnerships where, we know we were both very accountable to one another throughout the long and arduous process, and it really didn't feel like work. Even as we were getting to the last 6 to 8 weeks of our deadline, where I really felt like I was, I escort the kids to the bus stop, and then it was, all right, let's get to 8 hours of writing, and then the bus would come. Oh my gosh, it's time for them to come home already, and those were those last steps. And, but really, it was this. It didn't feel like work, because it was a creative outlet, as well as kind of a servant leader outlet, to say, I hope that practitioners will use this book, and that it fills a gap in professional development, which is just so important to. I know important to Kathy and important to me, because we that jazz.
So I know I didn't ask this in advance, but and hopefully you'll know, since the book is coming out any day now, if someone wants a copy of the book, where do they go? What do they do?
Yep. So, I mean, you can get it on, it'll be on Amazon. So Amazon's always a good, quick, but it's through Information Age Publishing. And so you can go directly to their website. I know that they're offering discounts right away on it. But we will also be having, some tables, and you'll be able to, get access to them, probably at ILA, the next convention in Florida, and some other ways. And if people are having problems finding it, please just holler at either one of us, and we'll make sure you can get a copy of it. So, yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, any day now, you'll be able to get your hands on The Role of Leadership Educators, Transforming Learning. Awesome. Well, thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As you know, Pause for Pedagogy is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. All of our articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org, and you can also follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thank you both so much. Looking forward to reading that book pretty soon.
Welcome.
Thank you.